We will start by selecting a composition using the viewfinder. Some things to consider and include are light and shadow interplay, variety and size of shapes, as well as shapes created by negative spaces. Since this is a precursor to a portrait painting, I will give the picture a vertical orientation. Next, I will draw in borders or edges for my picture that are roughly the same proportions as my viewfinder. Also, like on my viewfinder, I will draw crosshairs on my picture plane. These will help in accurately placing objects within my composition. To start the actual drawing, I'll make boundary marks on the top, bottom, and sides. This is also to help with the placement of the subject within the picture. Using my boundary marks and crosshairs as reference, I will begin lightly sketching in my drawing, holding my pencil loosely and making lots of lines. At this point, I am looking at negative shapes, trying not to focus on the object itself, but instead on the spaces around it, the negative space. I am also squinting to avoid details and to better see lights and darks as well as shapes. Also remember that shadows are shapes as well. I am also checking angles in my drawing to see how they compare to angles on my subject. Once you have sketched in your negative shapes, you can start on the positive shapes, or shapes in the object itself. One way to think about it is where the negative space meets the positive space is where you should be drawing your line. Our purpose in this first step is to sketch in a general outline. We should not be too worried about mistakes or getting things right. We will be making corrections in the next step. For now, we just want to work as smoothly as possible without stopping and just get a general impression of the subject down on the paper. In the second step, we'll be making structural corrections to our drawing. Where in our initial sketch we were more concerned with a loose general impression, in this step we will be clarifying and solidifying our subject. We will switch our thinking from a purely visual one of abstract shapes to a more tangible one of actual physical objects. Or, instead of drawing what we see, we will now be drawing what we know. So what does this mean? Okay, we know, for instance, that part of our subject is a three-dimensional rectangle or a cube. And we know that cubes have parallel sides. In my initial, more impressionistic drawing, some of the lines that should have been parallel are not. So applying what I know about cubes, I can now correct the lines and make them parallel as I know they should be. This two-step process of capturing an impression and then correcting is the same process we will be using when doing an actual portrait. We will first capture a purely visual impression of the face, followed by applying and correcting with what we know about the human face. which is anatomy and structure. In the meantime, I will continue correcting structure, clarifying lines, measuring, and checking proportions throughout my drawing. Once I have a good, clear outline, we will proceed to the next step. Sometimes we might end up with a few too many lines or maybe overly dark lines and make our drawing unclear. One solution is to clean it up with an eraser, taking it down to a ghost image, then redrawing the whole thing with a clear, defined line. The next step in our drawing will be to add value, or shading as it's sometimes called. Before we move into that, we are going to make a value scale. A value scale is a very useful tool that will be of great help to us in determining values or tones in our drawings and paintings. A value scale is an organized system for showing the gradual changes of tone or value from light to dark or dark to light. In nature, this gradation is continuous and contains an infinite variety of tones. In painting, photography, and other visual arts, an abbreviated version of the continuous scale has been developed and used over time. Most common is a 9-step scale, with number 1 as the lightest tone and number 9 as the darkest. For the number 1 or lightest tone, we will use the color of the paper. We will use a charcoal pencil and compressed charcoal to fill in our value scale. We will begin by filling in step 9, the darkest tone, with compressed charcoal. Next, we will fill in the exact middle tone, or value 5. Trying to render a middle tone accurately can be tricky even for an experienced person. For the sake of saving time, I would recommend printing out a scale off the internet and working from that. You can also work directly from a screen if you don't have a printer. I will fill in value 5 using my charcoal pencil, cross-hatching it in. Cross-hatching is basically just drawing parallel lines very close to each other to create a tone. You can then draw them in the opposite direction or cross-hatch it. This will make the tone darker. At this point, you might be tempted to start rubbing the charcoal to make things go a little bit faster. But just for this exercise, I would ask you to avoid doing that and continue using the cross-hatching method to fill in the boxes. After value 5 is complete, I will move on to value 7, which is in the exact middle between 5 and 9. At this point, you may no longer need to use the printed scale. A good way to see the tones is to squint. This will give you an accurate overall view of the gradations. Continue filling in the values until the scale is complete. To use the value scale, first I will look at my subject and pick an area or shape of tone to reproduce in my drawing. In this case, I will choose the main rectangular plane in the center of the composition. I will compare its tone to my value scale and identify approximately where it falls within the scale. In this case, it seems to be a value 5 or 6. Then I will lightly draw a number 6 on the corresponding plane in my drawing. Next, I'm going to move on to the cast shadow on the bottom box. This one seems to be about a 4 or a 5. I'm going to call it a 5. I will then draw the corresponding value number on my drawing. I will continue to match shapes with value numbers throughout my drawing. Now that we have a good idea of which tones go where, I am going to start filling in the shapes with the proper tone. I will start with the cylinder shadow, which is about a 4 or a 5 tone. To make the cylinder feel more round, I'm going to apply the crosshatch following the form or contour of the cylinder, using a curved stroke. I will keep working at it until the tone is about a 5 according to my value scale. Next, I will move on to the cast shadow, working until I get close to where my value should be. In this one, about a value 5. Next, I will move on to the main large plane, which I decided was about a value 6. Since this is a slightly darker value, I'm going to use the side of my pencil in order to get it darker a little quicker. After this, I will continue working on the rest of the drawing, filling in values. It's important not to attempt to match values perfectly. As long as you get close, adjustments can be made at the end after everything is filled in. After everything is blocked in, I can start making adjustments, making things darker and sharper, as well as making them lighter using the eraser. It could keep on going, but I'm going to stop for now. I would like to point out a couple of things that have occurred in our drawing that will most likely show up in our future work. First, notice that this plane, even though it has not been lightened or altered at all, appears to be lighter or of a higher value than the equivalent value on our scale. This illusion is caused by the fact that this plane is surrounded or juxtaposed by darker tones, thus making it appear to be lighter. This is something to be aware of, as chances are you will be seeing it frequently. Another thing that has happened in our drawing, and that we should take note of, is the majority of the values are in the middle areas, or the middle tones. There are very few extremely light and almost no extremely dark tones. The majority of the picture exists in the middle. This is another thing to consider, especially as we get into painting and color. This is the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and I hope it was helpful.